Sandra always believed that some memories carried a kind of weight that became harder to hold the longer she kept them inside. The moment she stepped into that small backstage room, years after the world had paired her name with Keanu's in jokes and interviews, she felt a familiar ache rise in her chest. The room was quiet, warm, and decorated with glowing lamps that cast soft reflections on the walls. She stood in the middle of it, breathing slowly, knowing she was finally ready to share the story he never expected her to reveal. She knew it would touch many people because it was not about fame or romance or the noise the world loved to create. It was about humanity, resilience, humility, and the kind of kindness that stayed with a person even when life tried to bury it under years of work and responsibility. She sat down, folded her hands, and closed her eyes for a moment. Then she began telling the team around her the moment that changed her relationship with Keanu forever, even before the world saw their chemistry or before their names became linked by curiosity. What she was ready to share came from a time when both of them were younger, quieter, and far less certain of themselves. It came from a day that almost broke her spirit and would have changed her entire life if Keanu had not stepped in with a calm strength that surprised even her. Back then, before they filmed together, Sandra was still trying to find her place in an industry that demanded her full heart every single day. She had already learned to hide her exhaustion with a smile, to carry her fear inside her ribs so no one could see it. She had learned to pretend she understood everything even when she felt lost. She thought she had to stay strong at all times to earn respect, but she later realized that respect came from being real, not from pretending to be made of steel. In those early years, the pressure grew heavier each day until she reached a moment she no longer knew how to carry it. She remembered one particular morning, long before bright sets and movie promotions, when she sat in her apartment staring at a script that made her doubt everything about herself. Her lines felt wrong in her mouth, her emotions felt misplaced, and her confidence collapsed piece by piece. She had been up all night rereading page after page, hoping something would change in her heart. Instead, the doubt grew stronger. When the sun finally rose, she felt a wave of dread wash over her. The world outside her window looked normal, but her mind felt like it was breaking apart. She dragged herself to the studio that morning with her shoulders tense, her throat dry, and her heart pounding under her jacket. She kept telling herself to breathe, to push through, to stay focused. She had no idea that on the other side of the hallway, Keanu was arriving early too, moving with that same silent calmness he always carried. Back then, they barely knew each other, but he already noticed everything, especially when someone around him was hurting. As she walked through the corridor, she forced a smile at crew members passing by. They smiled back, unaware of the storm she was holding inside. When she reached the rehearsal room, she felt a sudden wave of dizziness. She stood still, gripping the edge of a table to steady herself, hoping the trembling in her hands would stop before anyone noticed. But Keanu noticed. He had been sitting on the floor tying his boots, preparing for a physical scene that required precision. He looked up at the exact moment her fingers tightened on the table, and he immediately stood. He did not rush or make a scene. He simply walked toward her with steady steps, like he understood the weight she was carrying without needing any explanation. She remembered how he quietly asked if she was all right. His voice was soft, not demanding, not intrusive. It was the kind of voice that made people feel seen, not judged. She tried to shrug it off, to act like everything was fine, but her breathing betrayed her. She could not hide the truth from someone who was paying such quiet, sincere attention. She sat down slowly, pressing a hand to her forehead. She felt embarrassed for letting her emotions show at a time when she wanted to appear strong. But Keanu knelt beside her, placing himself at her level, not towering above her, not trying to take control. She once told people she felt safe around him, and this moment was the reason for that feeling. He asked if she needed a moment. She nodded, unable to speak without her voice breaking. He did not fill the silence with useless advice. He simply stayed with her while she breathed through the panic. He waited. That alone meant more to her than anything. After a few minutes, she finally whispered that she was afraid she was not good enough. She feared messing up the movie. She feared disappointing people who believed in her. She feared being the weak link in a chain that required perfection. As soon as the words left her mouth, she regretted them. She expected him to tell her she was being dramatic or unrealistic, but he never reacted that way. Instead, he leaned slightly forward, lowering his voice so no one else could hear. He told her something that stayed with her for years. She would later repeat this sentence in interviews, not word for word, but the meaning always stayed close. He said she did not have to be perfect to be powerful. He reminded her that every person on that set was scared sometimes. He said she was allowed to breathe, allowed to feel overwhelmed, allowed to be human. He added that the fact she cared so much proved her heart was in the right place. The kindness in his voice made tears gather in her eyes. She tried to look away, but Keanu gently rested a hand on the table, giving her space while still grounding her in the moment. She whispered that she did not want to slow down the team. He told her the team did not need perfection from her, only her presence and spirit. Then he told her something she never forgot. He said that some of the strongest people he knew were the ones who admitted when they were struggling. She breathed out for the first time that morning. Her shoulders relaxed. For a moment, the fear loosened its grip. She looked at him and saw not a rising star or a mysterious figure the world adored, but a man with genuine empathy. He carried his own scars. She could feel that even then, but he never projected them onto anyone else. Instead, he used the pain life had given him to understand others with a depth that many people overlooked. That day, Keanu helped her regain her balance without making her feel weak. He helped her walk back into the rehearsal room, not because she suddenly felt perfect, but because she felt supported. She realized something important then. Support did not always look like loud motivation or big speeches. Sometimes it came in small moments, quiet gestures, and soft reminders that she was not alone. The entire day improved after that moment. She delivered her lines with more stability. She moved with greater confidence. She even laughed during breaks because the weight on her heart had eased. Keanu did not hover around her or insist on checking in every few minutes. He simply gave her a reassuring nod now and then, and that was enough. That simple connection, that quiet understanding, created a bond between them long before the public believed anything was there. Years later, when the world started asking her if she ever had feelings for him or if there had been a spark between them, she always smiled. She never revealed the full story. She always protected that memory because it belonged to a version of herself that was vulnerable and afraid, and to a version of him who helped her when he had no reason to. She held onto that moment as something sacred, something that shaped their trust and respect. But now, sitting in that small backstage room, she felt ready to share it, ready to let the world understand why she always looked at him with such warm eyes in interviews. People made assumptions, created stories, spread rumors, but none of them knew the quiet truth. None of them knew how his kindness saved her spirit on a day she almost lost her sense of self-worth. As she continued talking to the team, she described the moment when rehearsals ended that day. She remembered thinking the studio would feel cold and empty after such an emotional morning. To her surprise, it felt peaceful. She was packing her bag when she noticed him leaning against the doorway. He did not interrupt. He waited until she looked up. Then he asked a simple question. He asked if she wanted company on the walkout because the parking area was dimly lit and could feel unsafe at night. She knew he was tired. Everyone was, yet he offered to walk with her without any expectation. She accepted, feeling grateful. They walked side by side down a quiet hallway, their footsteps echoing softly. She told him she felt embarrassed about her panic. He shook his head gently and said embarrassment had no place in moments of honesty. He said the world put too much pressure on people to act perfect, and he believed that real connection came from the truth, not from flawless images. They reached the exit, and she remembered the way the cool night air brushed her face. It felt refreshing, grounding. She thanked him for staying with her. He nodded, giving one of those small, thoughtful smiles he rarely showed unless he meant it. Before she drove away, he told her to take the night to breathe and rest, and he would see her in the morning. She sat in her car long after he walked away. She replayed the entire day in her mind. She realized she had judged herself too harshly for too long. She realized she needed to allow herself moments of weakness so she could grow stronger. And she realized that kindness, when given freely, had the power to change the course of a person's day, or even their entire path. She whispered a quiet promise to herself that night. She promised she would never forget the way he made her feel seen when she felt invisible. She promised she would carry that memory not as a moment of fear, but as a moment of strength. The next day, she walked into the studio with a lighter heart. She still felt nervous, but she was no longer drowning in it. She saw him across the room, adjusting one of the props for the scene. He glanced up, gave her a soft nod, and passed her a cup of warm tea without saying a word. It felt like a blessing, a quiet gesture that meant he believed in her again today, just as he did yesterday. That tiny moment became a turning point. And that turning point led to another moment she still remembered with painful clarity. It happened late one afternoon, after they finished filming a demanding emotional scene. And it changed everything. Because that was the moment she discovered something about Keanu, that he had tried so hard to hide. The moment that changed everything happened on a day that began quietly, almost peacefully, as if the world was preparing them for something deeper than both of them expected. Sandra remembered that afternoon with painful clarity, not because of the scene they were rehearsing or the lines they were practicing, but because she saw something in Keanu that explained his strength, his silence, and the depth of his kindness in a way she had never understood before. It started with a long emotional scene that required both of them to confront intense feelings. They were supposed to portray fear, loss, and determination, and while most actors called it just part of the job, Sandra felt the weight of it pulling at her chest. She always gave her full heart to her roles, and she knew Keanu did the same. But that day, something felt different in the air. There was a tension, a heaviness hidden behind his calm expression that she could not quite name. As the director called for a short break, Sandra walked to the far corner of the studio, rubbing her hands together. She felt her body cooling down from the emotional strain. She grabbed a bottle of water, opened it slowly, and stared at the floor, trying to steady her breathing. She believed the day was over emotionally, but then she heard a voice call Keanu's name. It was one of the assistant production managers, her tone urgent, almost afraid. Sandra looked up instinctively. Keanu turned his head slightly, but his body remained still, almost like he already knew what kind of news was coming. She watched him from across the room, her breath caught in her throat as the assistant approached him with cautious steps, holding something in her hands. It was a small envelope, creased and worn at the edges, as if it had been held too tightly by someone who did not want to let it go. The assistant whispered something to him. Sandra could not hear the words, but she saw the way his face shifted. His calm expression cracked for the first time since she had met him. His jaw tightened slightly, his shoulders lifted as if holding back a storm. Sandra froze. She had never seen him look like that. The air around them changed instantly. It felt heavier, colder, like a cloud had moved across the sun and stolen the warmth from the room. Keanu took the envelope with slow, steady hands. He nodded at the assistant, thanking her in his gentle voice, and walked toward the side door of the studio. He closed it behind him without saying anything. No one followed him. No one even dared to ask if he was all right. Everyone respected his privacy, but Sandra felt something deeper pulling her attention toward him. She sensed a truth she had not yet uncovered. She waited for a few minutes, trying to decide if she should check on him. She knew how kind he had been to her when she struggled. She knew how his quiet support had carried her through a dark moment. But she also knew he was a man who valued his space. She did not want to intrude, yet something in her heart urged her to move. It was not curiosity, it was connection. It was empathy. It was the recognition of a pain she had once felt herself. She set her water bottle down, walked slowly toward the side door, and placed her ear close enough to hear if he was still inside. She expected silence. She expected calm. Instead, she heard a sound that broke her heart instantly. It was a quiet breath, shaky and uneven, the kind someone made when trying not to cry. She stepped back, unsure of what to do. She had never heard him like that before. The man who had shown her strength and comfort was now alone in a room, carrying something that clearly hurt him deeply. She hesitated again, but the memory of his kindness pushed her forward. She lifted her hand and tapped on the door, not too loudly, just enough for him to hear her presence. He did not answer at first. She waited. Then she heard his voice, soft and strained. He said she could come in if she wanted. She opened the door slowly. The room was small, dimly lit, and quiet. Keanu stood near a metal table, his back slightly turned, the envelope resting beside him. His hands were pressed against the edge of the table as if grounding himself. She stepped inside, closing the door gently behind her. She did not speak at first. She simply stood beside him, giving him time to compose himself. He looked down at the envelope but did not touch it. After a moment, he finally said that the letter came from someone he had not heard from in a very long time. His voice was low, almost distant, like he was speaking from a place far deeper than the room they stood in. Sandra waited, knowing he would only continue if he chose to. He inhaled slowly before explaining that the letter came from a person who once meant everything to him but had left a painful mark on his life. He did not describe the relationship. He did not give details. He simply said that the words inside the letter brought back memories he had buried for years. Memories of loss, broken trust, and the weight of trying to move forward when the world felt too heavy. As he spoke, Sandra watched his hands tremble slightly on the table. Her heart tightened. She had never seen him reveal a piece of himself so openly. She asked gently if he wanted to talk about it. He shook his head, not because he wanted to hide anything, but because some pain was too raw to revisit in words. She understood that feeling better than anyone. She stepped closer, placing her hand near his on the table without touching him. She wanted him to know she was there. She wanted him to feel the same safety he had given her days earlier. He glanced at her hand, then at her face. His eyes were tired, shadowed, filled with an ache she recognized. She whispered that he did not have to be alone with this, not today. He took another breath, the tension in his shoulders easing only slightly. He said he appreciated her kindness more than she knew. For a while they stood together in silence. The quiet was not uncomfortable. It was healing. It was steady. It allowed both of them to breathe through emotions that felt too heavy to carry alone. Then something unexpected happened. As Keanu reached for the envelope again, a small photograph slipped out from inside and fell onto the floor. Sandra bent down to pick it up before he could react. When she held it in her hand, her breath caught. She saw a young Keanu, much younger than she had ever seen him, standing beside a woman with a gentle smile. But what struck her most was not the picture itself. It was the expression on his face. He looked hopeful, vulnerable, and deeply connected to the woman beside him. Keanu reached for the photo, but Sandra did not hand it back immediately. She studied it for another second, then looked up at him with slow understanding. She whispered that she had never seen that side of him before. He exhaled softly, almost painfully, and said he did not expect anyone ever would. He told her the woman in the picture was someone who once promised to stay in his life, but life had other plans. She left without closure, leaving a silence that haunted him for years. Sandra felt a rush of empathy wash over her. She could feel the weight of his past pressing against the quiet room. She finally handed him the photograph, her fingers brushing his briefly. She told him it was okay to miss someone who had shaped him, even if the memory hurt. He listened carefully, his eyes softening with a fragile gratitude. He then revealed something that surprised her deeply. He said her panic the other day reminded him of his own moments of weakness, the ones he never allowed himself to show. He said seeing her vulnerability made him remember a younger version of himself who also felt lost and afraid. And he said helping her helped him feel less alone. Those words struck her like a gentle blow to the heart. She had no idea her fear had touched him in any way. She had no idea her struggle had mirrored something in him. She realized then that the bond between them had started long before she knew it. As they continued talking quietly, the weight on his shoulders began to lighten. He put the photograph back inside the envelope with care, as if placing the memory back where it belonged. He admitted he did not know what to do with the emotions that resurfaced. She told him he did not need to make any decision today. Sometimes healing came in waves, not answers. When they stepped out of the room, the studio felt different, brighter, gentler. The rest of the team returned from their break, unaware of the moment shared behind that door, but Sandra felt something shift in her heart. She knew something now that she had never known before. She saw the humanity behind his strength. She saw the pain that shaped his kindness. And she saw the quiet resilience that made him the man everyone admired. That day changed their connection forever. And yet, what happened later that night changed it even more. Because hours after they wrapped filming, Sandra made a decision she had never told anyone about. A decision Keanu still did not know she made. A decision that would lead her to uncover a truth he never wanted her to see. That night stayed carved in Sandra's memory like a quiet scar, not because of anything dramatic she intended to do, but because of something deeper moving inside her chest. When she left the studio after talking to Keanu about the letter, she felt an ache she could not ignore. It was not pity. It was not curiosity. It was a pull toward understanding the man behind the calm voice and steady presence. He had helped her through her fear. She had stood beside him in his pain. Yet something about the envelope, the photograph, and the tension in his eyes told her there was more he was carrying, something he had not said aloud. As she drove home that evening, the sky was already turning dark, and the city lights blinked like scattered stars across the streets. She kept replaying the moment she saw the tremble in his hands, the crack in his voice, the weight in his breathing. She wondered how many people had ever seen that side of him. She wondered how many people believed he never struggled at all. The world saw strength. She saw wounds wrapped in silence. She poured herself a cup of tea when she got home, hoping the warm steam would calm her mind. But every sip deepened her concern instead of easing it. She walked around her living room, touching the back of her couch, running her fingers across the books on her shelf, trying to focus on something else. Nothing helped. She sat down again and placed her head in her hands. She knew that pain had a way of hiding in people who seemed the strongest. She had lived through it herself. She had been the smiling face with the trembling heart many times. That was when her phone buzzed. She picked it up expecting a message from the production manager or a reminder for the next day's call time. Instead, she saw a short text from someone on the studio security team. It simply said that Keanu had stayed behind long after everyone left. He was still in one of the empty rehearsal rooms, sitting alone, staring at something on the table. That message was the moment she stood up without thinking. She grabbed her jacket, her keys, and stepped outside into the cool night air. Her mind did not argue with her heart. Her body just moved. She drove back toward the studio, the roads quiet, the streetlights stretching across the pavement like soft ribbons. She felt nervous, unsure if she was doing the right thing, but she knew she could not leave him alone with a pain so heavy it made him break his silence. When she reached the studio gates, the guard recognized her and waved her in without question. The hallways inside were dim, empty, and strangely echoing. Her footsteps sounded like soft taps along the polished floor. She walked slowly, not wanting to startle him, not wanting to intrude, but her heart pushed her forward step after step. She reached the rehearsal room where the guard said he had seen him. The door was slightly open. She placed her hand on the frame and listened. She heard nothing at first, then she heard a faint sound. It was the quiet rustle of paper. Her throat tightened. She knocked gently before stepping inside. Keanu sat at the center table, the envelope open, the photograph lying beside it. The rest of the pages were spread around him, each one holding pieces of the story he had never told anyone. He looked up when he heard her enter. His eyes held a mix of surprise, confusion, and something she recognized immediately, pain still softening his expression. She apologized softly for coming unannounced, but he shook his head, telling her she did not need to apologize. She paused, unsure of what to say next, but he broke the silence first. He said that sometimes old memories did not knock before returning. Sometimes they arrived like storms without warning. She walked toward him slowly, taking in the sight of him under the dim light. He looked different from the man she had seen on set earlier. He looked younger in his vulnerability, older in his grief, and somehow more real than ever. She asked if he wanted company or if he wanted time alone. He hesitated for a moment, then said he did not want to be alone anymore. Her heart sank gently in her chest. She sat across from him, hands folded in her lap. He picked up one of the letters and handed it to her. She did not read it right away. She waited for him to speak first. He said the letters came from the same woman in the photograph. He explained that after she left him years ago, she wrote to him many times, but he never opened the envelopes. He kept them hidden in a drawer, unable to face the hurt they carried. He thought ignoring them would make the pain easier to live with. But the truth was, the weight of the unopened letters became heavier with time. The one he opened today was the last one she sent, before she disappeared from his life completely. Sandra listened with growing sadness. She asked gently what the last letter said. He looked at the pages around him with tired eyes. He said the last letter apologized for leaving, explained that she had been struggling with her own battles, and told him she hoped he would find peace one day. It also said she believed he would become someone kind, strong, and deeply loved. Sandra lowered her gaze. She suddenly understood why the letter hurt him so deeply. She understood why it broke the calm he always carried. It was not just about the woman who left. It was about the part of himself he had buried, the part that once believed in hope, in holding on, in trusting someone with his heart. She spoke softly, telling him that opening the letter now showed courage, not weakness. He smiled faintly, tiredly, and said he was not sure he agreed. She leaned forward with gentle certainty and told him she had seen brave people in her life, but none had ever faced their past as quietly and honestly as he had tonight. He looked at her with a gratitude that shook her. Then something unexpected happened. As he reached for another letter, his hand slipped. The envelope tipped over and a small bracelet fell out from the stack. It landed near her feet. She bent to pick it up. It was delicate, made of simple beads, nothing expensive, nothing flashy, but it carried an energy she felt immediately. She held it gently and asked what it was. He swallowed, his voice softening even more. He said the bracelet had belonged to the woman in the photograph. She had given it to him the night she told him she believed he deserved someone who understood the depth of his heart. He said he kept it because it reminded him of the promise he once made, to always stay kind no matter how deeply life wounded him. Sandra held the bracelet the way someone holds something fragile that carries a history. She looked at him with slow understanding. She said he did keep that promise. He asked how she knew. She said she had seen the way he treated people, the way he comforted her, the way he moved through the world without bitterness. He lowered his head briefly, almost overwhelmed by her sincerity. They sat in silence after that, not the silence of discomfort, but the silence of two people who understood each other without needing many words, the kind of silence that held healing in it, the kind of silence that built trust. Then Sandra made a choice she had not planned to make. When Keanu stood to gather the letters again, she carefully reached out and stopped his hand. She asked him if she could read one of the letters, not because she wanted to invade his privacy, but because she wanted to understand the pain he had carried alone for so long. He hesitated. He stared at her with eyes that held both fear and vulnerability. Then, slowly, he nodded. She opened the first letter gently. She only made it through a single paragraph before her heart broke in a way she did not expect. The letter spoke about love mixed with fear, about running from the person who cared the most, about being unable to accept kindness because it felt undeserved. It spoke about the hope that one day he would meet someone who would see the beauty in his gentleness, someone who would not run away from his quiet soul. The words felt like they were written to the man who sat across from her, not the man the world saw, but the man she had seen behind the closed door earlier. She closed the letter, overwhelmed. When she looked at him again, he was watching her, waiting, his eyes soft yet guarded. She whispered that she understood why the letters hurt. He breathed out slowly, as if relieved that she did not judge him. But she did not tell him the whole truth. She did not tell him that reading the letter made her feel something unexpected, something warm, something frightening, something that made her heart tighten in a way it had never tightened before. She carefully placed the letter back on the table and stood up. He watched her, waiting to see if she was about to leave. She stepped closer instead, gently placing the bracelet beside the photograph. She told him that he was stronger than he believed, more resilient than he realized, and far kinder than the world deserved. For a moment, the air between them felt heavy with something unspoken. Then the door creaked open slightly, and a stage light flickered in the hallway, pulling them out of the moment. Sandra stepped back. Keanu looked away. And in that quiet, fragile space, she realized something she had not meant to discover that night. She cared about him more deeply than she was ready to admit. But before she could say anything, before she could find the words for the truth rising inside her chest, something happened that neither of them expected. The studio alarm triggered. A piercing sound filled the hallway. Lights flashed. Voices echoed from outside. Keanu immediately moved toward the door. And Sandra followed him, completely unaware that the next few minutes would reveal something about him that changed everything she thought she understood. The alarm echoed through the long, empty hallway with a sharpness that cut straight through Sandra's chest. The flashing red lights washed the studio walls in a harsh glow, and the calm silence from moments earlier disappeared in an instant. Keanu reacted immediately. He pushed open the rehearsal room door and stepped into the hallway, scanning the space with alert, steady eyes. Sandra followed right behind him, her heartbeat thudding in her ears as the piercing sound vibrated through the air. She expected him to look confused like everyone else. She expected him to ask what was happening. Instead, something in his expression changed. His jaw tightened. His shoulders lifted slightly, and for the first time since she had known him, she saw a flicker of real fear in his eyes. It was not panic. It was something deeper. Something buried. Something that felt like a memory rising in the wrong moment. He moved quickly, not towards the exit where most people would run, but toward the side hallway that led to the storage rooms. Sandra hesitated for a second, unsure why he was heading there, but something in the way he moved, the urgency, the instinct, the quiet protectiveness, made her follow him without question. As they reached the hallway, the lights dimmed and brightened with every flash of the alarm. The air grew colder, as if the whole building was holding its breath. Sandra called out to him, asking if he knew what triggered the alarm. He did not answer immediately. He walked forward, breathing harder than before, his steps quick but careful. She thought he was focused on finding the source of the alarm. She was wrong. He was trying to outrun something inside himself. She caught up to him and placed her hand gently on his arm. He stopped, closing his eyes for a brief second. His breathing shook only slightly, but enough for her to notice. She whispered his name, and when he turned toward her, she saw a truth in his expression that struck her deeply. He was not afraid of danger. He was afraid of a memory. He whispered that alarms had always unsettled him, even as a child. He said he never learned how to control the way they triggered something inside him, something tied to a past filled with sudden losses, unexpected tragedies, and moments where he had been forced to stay calm even when his world was falling apart. Sandra stepped closer, lowering her voice so it would not compete with the noise. She told him he was not alone. He nodded, trying to steady himself. Even in fear, he still looked like someone trying to protect everyone around him. She admired him for that, but she also ached for him, knowing he carried a burden he rarely showed. As they turned the corner, the alarm suddenly stopped. The silence was almost as loud as the sound that came before it. The hallway lights returned to their normal brightness. But Keanu did not relax. He stood still, frozen in place, staring at a small storage room at the end of the hallway. Sandra followed his gaze, unsure what had caught his attention. She stepped closer and saw what he saw, a faint light coming from under the door, flickering like a candle that refused to stay still. Keanu walked toward the door with slow, cautious steps. Sandra followed him, her own heart tightening. When he reached the door, he pressed his hand against it. The surface felt warm, too warm. He stepped back, his expression sharpening with concern. Before Sandra could ask what was happening, he grabbed the handle and pulled it open. A rush of warm, smoky air hit them. Inside the room, a small electrical panel had overheated, causing a thin trail of smoke to rise into the air. Nothing had caught fire, but the heat and smoke were enough to trigger the alarm. Keanu quickly stepped inside to make sure nothing else was damaged. Sandra stood at the doorway, watching him as he inspected the panel with surprising knowledge and precision. As he worked, the smoke swirled around him in slow waves. She noticed the way his shoulders shook slightly each time the faint crackle of the overheated wires echoed inside the small room. He was trying to hide it, but she saw the trembling. She saw the memories fighting their way to the surface. She stepped forward and placed her hand firmly on his arm. He looked back at her, his breath uneven. She asked softly if he was okay. He tried to nod, but the truth was written all over his face. He whispered that smoke always reminded him of a night he tried hard to forget. A night he had never spoken about in detail. A night that took someone he cared for deeply. Sandra felt a chill climb her spine. She stepped between him and the open panel, blocking the smoke from reaching his face. He blinked, surprised by her protective gesture. She guided him out of the room into the hallway where the air was cleaner. He did not resist. He followed her like someone walking out of a memory instead of a smoke-filled room. Once they reached the clearer part of the hallway, he leaned against the wall and dragged a hand across his face. His breathing was still uneven. She stood in front of him, giving him space but refusing to step away. She knew what it felt like to drown in an old pain. She knew what it felt like to try and hide it from the world. He had been there for her when she struggled. Now it was her turn. She whispered that he did not have to relive the memory alone. He stared at the floor, silent. Then he shook his head gently and said he did not want to bring his past into her life. She stepped closer, her voice steady, telling him that his past shaped him, and she wanted to understand the parts he kept hidden. Not because she was curious, but because she cared. He lifted his eyes slowly. The vulnerability she saw there made her heart tight in a way she was not prepared for. He finally told her the truth. Years ago, before fame, before the world knew his name, he was in an apartment with someone he loved when a small electrical fire broke out. It grew too quickly. They tried to escape, but smoke filled the hallway faster than they expected. They were separated in the chaos. Keanu escaped, but the person he cared for did not. He blamed himself for years. He believed he should have done more, even though everyone told him there was nothing he could have done. As he spoke, his voice cracked in the middle of a sentence. Sandra felt her eyes burn. She reached for his hand carefully, slowly, giving him the chance to pull away if he wanted. He did not move. He let her hold it. His hand was warm, tense, trembling slightly. She squeezed it gently, grounding him the way he once grounded her in a quiet rehearsal room. She whispered that he had carried that pain alone for too long. She told him he deserved healing too. He stared at her hand, holding his, as if trying to understand why her touch felt like relief. They stayed like that for a long moment, hearts beating in fragile rhythm, surrounded by the fading echoes of the alarm. Then the studio manager entered the hallway, breathless and confused, asking if everything was all right. Keanu immediately stepped back, releasing Sandra's hand. He nodded at the manager, explaining calmly that the alarm came from an overheated electrical panel. He spoke with steady confidence again, hiding the vulnerability he had shown moments earlier. The manager thanked them and walked away, unaware of the emotional storm that had filled the hallway. Once they were alone again, Sandra looked at him with slow, quiet understanding. She could tell he was trying to rebuild the calm barrier he always wore. She gently told him that he did not have to pretend with her. He stared at her for a moment, conflicted. Then he whispered that she deserved someone who was whole, not someone who carried broken memories. Her heart ached. She stepped forward, refusing to let him sink back into silence. She told him that people were not meant to be whole. They were meant to be real. And real people came with cracks and scars and memories that shaped who they became. His eyes softened. He opened his mouth as if to say something. But before he could form the words, her phone rang. She answered, stepping away only one small step. When she heard the voice on the other end, her expression changed. Keanu noticed instantly. She ended the call and turned back to him with fear in her eyes. Something serious had happened. Something connected to her past. Something she had never told Keanu. And now it was coming back. She whispered his name softly. Then she told him a truth she had kept hidden for years. A truth he never expected to hear from her lips the moment she ended the call. The hallway seemed to shrink around her. The air felt colder, heavier, as if the weight of her past had suddenly stepped out of the shadows and wrapped itself around her chest. Keanu watched her carefully. He noticed the way her hands trembled, the way her breath grew uneven, the way her eyes stared through the wall as if she had been pulled into a memory she never wanted to revisit. He stepped toward her slowly, not wanting to overwhelm her but unable to hide his concern. He asked her softly what happened. She opened her mouth to speak, but her voice caught in her throat. She turned her face away for a moment, pressing her hand against her forehead, trying to steady herself. He whispered her name, and something in his voice brought her back to the present. She finally looked at him, and for the first time since he met her, he saw fear in her eyes that went deeper than nerves, deeper than stress, deeper than exhaustion. She told him she needed to sit down. He nodded and guided her to a bench in the hallway. She sat slowly, lowering herself with trembling limbs. He sat beside her, giving her space, but staying close enough that she could feel his presence like an anchor. After a long silence, she whispered that the call was from someone she hoped she would never hear from again. Someone who knew a part of her history she had tried to leave behind. Someone who held a truth that she never wanted to revisit. Keanu listened without interrupting. She said the voice on the phone belonged to a person from her early years in the industry, a person who once held power over her in a way that made her feel small, afraid, and unseen. She never talked about it publicly. She never told her closest friends. She hid it behind smiles, behind jokes, behind strong characters and polished interviews. She thought she left that fear behind, but the phone call proved otherwise. She explained that in those early days, when she was still learning how to navigate the industry, she fell under the influence of someone who pretended to guide her. He promised opportunities, connections, and safety. But instead of support, he gave her pressure and manipulation. He made her feel like her worth depended on him. She carried that fear for years until she finally broke away, choosing her freedom over his control. The phone call tonight was the first time she heard his voice since the day she walked away. Keanu listened with a stillness that felt sacred. He did not ask questions, he did not judge, he simply let her speak. She continued, her voice shaking, telling him that the man had called because he had discovered she was working with Keanu. He said he wanted to meet her. He said he had something she needed to hear. She felt her heart drop when she repeated his words. Keanu clenched his jaw, not out of anger toward her, but out of protective instinct. He asked her gently if she wanted to meet the man. She shook her head quickly, fear rising in her chest again. She said she did not want to go near him. She said she did not want to reopen wounds she worked so hard to heal. She lowered her voice even more and admitted she had never told anyone about this. Not her friends, not directors, not producers. She said she told herself she was strong enough to carry it alone. She did not want anyone to see her as fragile. She did not want anyone to think her success came through pain. Keanu's expression softened with a tenderness she had never seen before. He took a slow breath and told her something that shifted the air around them. He said she did not owe anyone a perfect past. He said she did not need to hide her pain to be strong. He said strength did not come from being untouchable, but from surviving hardships with her heart still intact. She felt her throat close. She looked at him with tears forming in her eyes. Not because she felt weak, but because someone finally told her she did not have to pretend anymore. She whispered that she hated how the man's voice could still shake her after all these years. Keanu reached out gently, taking her hand in a way that asked for permission rather than assuming it. She let him. His touch grounded her instantly. His warmth steadied her pulse. He said healing was not supposed to be perfect. He said memories returned not to break her, but to remind her how far she had come. She exhaled slowly, releasing a breath she did not know she was holding. She looked at him again, their hands still touching. She admitted something she had never said aloud before. She said seeing his vulnerability earlier made her realize she did not want to hide her own truth from him. She said she trusted him in a way she did not trust anyone else. Keanu blinked, surprised by the weight of her words. Then something shifted in the hallway. It was small, barely noticeable, but meaningful. He gently tightened his hold on her hand. Not too much. Just enough for her to feel that he was there. Just enough to tell her she was not alone. They sat in silence after that, breathing in the same fragile rhythm. Their hearts beat in a quiet, steady harmony that neither of them expected. The hallway lights flickered softly, and the hum of the building returned as the alarm fully settled. She leaned slightly toward him, not fully resting on him, but close enough that she could feel the warmth of his shoulder beside hers. He did not move away. He stayed exactly where she needed him, a pillar of calm in the middle of her storm. After a long stretch of silence, he asked her what she wanted to do. She said she did not want to see the man. She said she did not owe him her time or her energy. He nodded, agreeing with her completely. He said she had every right to protect her peace. But then she confessed something she was ashamed to admit. She said the man hinted that he had information about someone from her past, someone connected to a mistake she made before she became famous, someone she had been trying to forget. She said she did not know if he was telling the truth or manipulating her again, but his words still shook her. Keanu's eyes sharpened instantly. He asked what mistake she meant. She hesitated, swallowing hard. She whispered that before she became the woman the world admired, she had once hurt someone unintentionally. She said it was an accident, a moment of carelessness she regretted for years. She said she tried to make it right, but the person disappeared from her life before she could. She looked down at the floor, ashamed. Keanu leaned forward slightly, his voice soft but firm. He told her every person had a past. Every person had regrets. He said she had spent her entire life trying to build kindness around her pain, and that alone made her stronger than she realized. Her eyes filled with tears again. He reached out and brushed his thumb across her hand, grounding her. She whispered his name, her voice trembling. But before she could tell him the full truth about the mistake she made, the hallway lights flickered again. The air shifted. Footsteps approached from around the corner. Slow, quiet, deliberate. Keanu turned his head sharply. Sandra froze. The footsteps grew closer. Keanu stood up, positioning himself between Sandra and the approaching figure with a protective instinct that came naturally to him. She stayed seated, her heart racing. A shadow appeared at the end of the hallway. Then a man stepped into the dim light. Sandra felt her stomach drop. She recognized him instantly. The voice from the phone. The man from her past. The person she hoped she would never see again. Keanu took a single step forward, his voice low and steady. He asked the man what he wanted. The man smiled slowly, calmly, as if he held no guilt at all. He said he wanted to finish a conversation he and Sandra started long ago. Sandra's hands clenched tightly in her lap. And before she could speak, Keanu said something that shocked both of them. He said the man needed to leave. Right now. The hallway fell silent. The tension thickened. And then the man looked directly at Sandra and revealed something she never expected to hear. Something that made her entire world tilt. Something that made Keanu step closer, ready to shield her from whatever came next. The hallway became painfully still as the man stepped forward, his eyes fixed on Sandra with a confidence that made her stomach twist. She looked at him the way a person looks at a storm they prayed would never return. Keanu stood firm, blocking her with his body in a quiet act of protection that spoke louder than any words ever could. The man folded his hands behind his back, tilting his head slightly, as if he enjoyed the discomfort he created. He said he came to deliver something important, something he claimed Sandra had been running from for years. Sandra felt her breath shake. She whispered to Keanu that she did not trust anything this man said, that he twisted the truth to get control. Keanu nodded gently, never taking his eyes off the man. He told her she was safe. He said it in a low voice that carried more strength than the entire building. The man ignored them both for a moment and looked around the empty hallway, as if he wanted the silence itself to witness what he was about to say. Then he turned back to Sandra and told her that the person she regretted hurting all those years ago had reached out to him. He said the person wanted to reconnect with her. He said the person had something to tell her, something she had been waiting to hear. The words hit her like a wave. Keanu stepped even closer, his voice sharp for the first time. He told the man to stop playing games. He demanded clarity. The man took a slow breath and finally spoke the words that made Sandra feel the ground shift beneath her feet. He said the person she had hurt had forgiven her. The hallway spun for a moment. Sandra gripped the edge of the bench to steady herself. The man continued, explaining that the person had told him they always understood it had been a mistake. They wished they had told her earlier. They wished she had not carried the guilt alone. They wished she had known she was forgiven long before she ever became famous. Sandra covered her mouth with her hand as tears began streaming down her cheeks. Years of regret broke open inside her chest like a dam collapsing. She had carried the weight of that mistake for so long that she forgot what it felt like to breathe freely. Keanu knelt in front of her immediately, his hands gently closing around her trembling ones. His eyes stayed firmly on her face, grounding her, steadying her. He whispered that she did not have to cry alone anymore. He whispered that she deserved peace. She tried to speak, but her voice cracked. She told him she had spent years wishing she could make it right. She told him she feared that person hated her. She told him she believed she would live her entire life with that silent guilt. Keanu squeezed her hands softly, telling her that she carried more kindness in her heart than she ever admitted. He said her guilt showed how deeply she cared. He said she had done her best, even when she felt broken. The man cleared his throat, trying to pull attention back to himself. He said he delivered the message. He said that was all he came for. But before he turned to leave, he added one more sentence. He said the person Sandra regretted hurting also told him something else. They said Sandra deserved someone who would never make her feel small again. Keanu's eyes flickered. Sandra's breath caught. The man nodded once, as if finishing a transaction, then stepped back into the darkness of the hallway and disappeared without another word. His footsteps faded until the building swallowed the sound completely. Sandra felt her whole body collapse into Keanu's hands. She cried with the kind of emotion that came from years of holding everything inside. He moved closer, wrapping his arms around her gently, giving her space to break and heal at the same time. She let her forehead rest against his shoulder, soaking in the warmth of his presence. He did not rush her. He did not tell her to stop crying. He simply held her, giving her the safety she had given him only hours earlier. When her breathing finally slowed, she pulled back slightly and looked at him. Her cheeks were wet, her eyes tired, but her expression held a softness he had not seen before. She whispered that she felt lighter for the first time in years. She said it felt like a burden had lifted from her chest. Keanu reached out and brushed a loose strand of hair from her face with a tenderness that made her heart tremble. He told her she deserved every moment of peace coming her way. He told her she had been carrying too much alone. He told her she did not have to do that anymore. She stared at him, the tears drying slowly on her skin. She whispered that he had helped her more than he knew. She said he had seen the parts of her she tried to hide. He replied softly that she had done the same for him. She had seen the cracks behind his calm, the wounds behind his strength, the memories he tried to bury. A deep silence fell between them. A silence full of understanding, full of unspoken truth, full of something warmer than friendship but quieter than romance. She took his hand slowly, gently, as if asking permission. He intertwined his fingers with hers, holding her with the same patience that defined everything about him. She whispered that she never expected to trust someone again in this way. He whispered that trust was something they had built together, moment by moment, pain by pain, truth by truth. Their faces were close now, close enough for her to see the softness in his eyes, close enough for him to feel the warmth of her breath, close enough for both of them to understand that what they shared was rare, delicate, and deeply real. She leaned her forehead against his, closing her eyes. He closed his too. The world felt quiet, even though nothing outside had changed. Their hearts beat in gentle rhythm, shaped by the storms they survived together. After a long moment, she whispered a question that trembled on her lips. She asked why he had been so kind to her, even when she felt broken. He opened his eyes and looked into hers, his voice barely above a whisper. He said he saw her strength even when she did not. He said he believed in the goodness she carried. He said she made him feel less alone. Her heart swelled with something deep, something she never expected to feel so strongly. She whispered that she wished she had told him this sooner. Keanu tilted his head slightly, confusion softening his expression. She took a slow breath and told him that she cared about him, not in the shallow way some people expected, not in the playful way interview questions suggested. She cared in a deeper, quieter way, in a way she could not ignore anymore. Keanu's breath caught. His eyes softened. But before she could misread his silence, he gently lifted her hand and pressed it between both of his, grounding himself in her warmth. He whispered that he cared too. Not loudly, not dramatically, but truthfully. He said she had shown him parts of himself he thought he lost. He said her presence brought peace into places he never talked about. He said she mattered to him in ways he never expected. Her eyes filled again, but this time with warmth instead of fear. They leaned their foreheads together once more, breathing in the closeness they had both needed for so long. After a long, quiet moment, he finally spoke the words that settled everything in her heart. He whispered that two people did not have to be perfect to heal each other. They only had to be honest. She squeezed his hand, a soft smile forming through the last of her tears. They sat like that until the hallway lights dimmed for the night cycle, wrapped in a calm that felt earned, not given. When they finally stood, he walked her to her car, not out of obligation, but out of the same gentle protection he had shown since the first day she broke down in that rehearsal room. She leaned against the car door for a moment, looking at him with the kind of gratitude that lived deep in the soul. She whispered, "Thank you." He whispered, "You are safe." Their eyes held each other for a long, quiet second. She stepped into the car, her heart full. He closed the door gently, giving her one last soft smile before stepping back. Sandra watched him through the window for a moment, realizing something she never expected to understand so clearly. He did not change her life with one big moment. He changed it with 1,000 small ones. And the truth she had revealed that night, the story he never expected her to share, would remain the foundation of their quiet, unbreakable bond. The bond shaped by kindness. The bond shaped by wounds. The bond shaped by the moments that stayed hidden until both of them were finally ready to speak. And for the first time in years, Sandra Bullock drove away feeling free. And Keanu Reeves watched her go, with a heart that finally felt understood.